Welcome, viewers. This is Tex the Black Pants Legion, and now this is an interview. I've spoken with admins, hosts, developers, and other creatives behind Space Station 13 before, and they are notoriously antisocial types who generally don't like to talk with or at people for prolonged periods of time, as they are judge, jury, and executioner on a server, and can't be seen demonstrating favoritism, at least in theory. Anyways, here's how this works. I'm putting out an open call to any and all Space Station 13 admins on any public listed servers. This call is here, so answer it. If you are interested in answering or participating in an interview about Space Station 13, its history, and your server, please respond. See the description below for an email contact. I'll try to get to you and we can set something up. That being said, this is an interview with a Space Station 13 admin. The questions are largely free-form, though there is a general script, and the discussion does not reflect exactly the policy of the server, unless stated otherwise by the person I'm interviewing. The reason I say this is that I want to encourage an admin to be frank, honest, and open about their experiences without worrying that they're shitting on their server, or to prevent them from being yelled at for representing the server community in a bad way. This is a point of view, and not, I repeat, not an absolute definition of doctrine on said server. That being said, I welcome our interviewee. Please, internet person, tell me your name you wish to go by, your server, and your rank.
I am Mad Snail Disease. I'm a developer for the Colonial Marine server, CMSS13. Yeah. So, I like to go by Snail or Mad Snail Disease or whatever works for you.
So MSD, Mad Snail Disease, Snail.
Yeah, everything works.
How does a man like you get a name like Snail?
So it started, for those of you who may get it off the bat, it's a SpongeBob reference. I made it quite a long time ago when I made my original Beyond account, and I kind of didn't feel like changing it and making a new account, so it kind of stuck.
I understand. So tell us about your server, its history. What was your place in it, and what makes it unique?
So I joined Colonial Marines officially as staff, as a coder, in May of 2016. I had some affiliation because I worked for New Eden before that, and New Eden and Colonial Marines were associated for a time, so I had a little bit of interaction then. But that puts me at about the 2.5-2 year mark for Colonial Marines, so I've seen all sorts of changes over time. I've been primarily working on, back-end development type of stuff. I'm not hyperactive. I'm really bad at art, so I've done stuff like the shuttles crashing into the ship, tanks, the map daemon, the thing that lets you vote on Colonial Marines.
So what do you think makes Colonial Marines, for one of the longest lasting, very popular servers, but two, a extremely popular server in terms of just player base?
For one thing, it's very different from the rest of the servers, because we branched off, like the actual code base branched off, I believe, from TG, I'm not 100% sure, branched off a long time ago. And everything since then, minus one or two features that we've gotten express permission from and licensed from other servers, has been completely homebrewed, and all of the art has been completely homebrewed. So you have a very different visual style, for one. If you pop into Colonial Marines, it looks visually very different from other Space Station 13 servers. But on top of that, mechanically, it's not the same. You're not on a station. You're even, it doesn't even quite go with the name. You're on a ship, and then you go on a planet. And in terms of why it's been popular for so long, I think a lot of players enjoy being able to hop in and just gun down some stuff, because it suits players who don't want to roleplay as much, but at the same time, it has a very good opportunity to roleplay if you want to.
Yeah, no, I understand. So why should a player play on your station? What do you think is that initial draw other than guns? What is the Colonial Marines experience in a nutshell?
That's a good question. The initial draw, I'd say, is part of it is the association with the Aliens franchise, because it's a very popular IP. And we have encountered problems with that being a very IP and being associated to that. That's another story. So that, I think, is a little bit of an initial draw. But past that, there's an important element of how the community behaves. I'm sure a lot of people say like, "Oh yeah, we have the best community." No one has the best community, but uh, just the very specific way the roleplay works in terms of having a little bit more coherent, finite, defined restrictions on people. So you can't say, "Oh, I'm just going to roleplay an asshole and kill people." That's not how that works. That's not how it would work in a theoretically realistic like military setting. So
Yeah.
kind of carries over in a unique way.
What is the most common thing that new players ask on your station, do you think?
Ooh, I do not do a lot of moderating, to be honest, but probably the first question everyone asks is, okay, where do I go to shoot stuff? You get a lot of people who are like, oh, I'm just going to go point a gun and fire. And sometimes that's at people, and that causes problems, but
Well, yeah.
that's probably the most common question.
Well, it's why I asked the question, because in many cases, when someone comes onto a station like Standard Space Station 13, they say, how do I use my hands, or how do I pick things up? But with Colonial Marines, from the get-go, I think they know why they're there.
Yeah, they want to know how to get on the shuttle, how to get down to the planet, and where to find the aliens.
So what made you volunteer your time to help develop this thing that has become, in many cases, the center of all drama, fun, chaos, and new things in Space Station 13?
So it's kind of a long and, I think, interesting story. I started my Space Station 13 experience entirely playing with friends on New Eden, back when that existed.
Yeah.
So I played that. I had a lot of fun. I kind of got to thinking about like the game design and just development in general. So I applied to be a developer for them. About 3 months later, just the entire server went under because of unimportant reasons, and so I was kind of left a little out in the open. I had done some. I was largely self-taught, and I started with Beyond Code. I'd done some like really minor classes elsewhere, but nothing significant. My first exposure to like object-oriented programming or large project management was through Space Station 13. And so I kind of milled about aimlessly for a while, and at a certain point I decided, you know what, I want to develop more. I really enjoyed it when I was doing it. I want to do it again. So I went to the hub, I looked at the server, I thought, oh, Colonial Marines, I recognize them from my time at New Eden, and they have a lot of people in active development. Let's sign up and see what I can do. And that's kind of just how I got started in the first place.
So, what would you say is the greatest challenge in your job and what you do for Colonial Marines? Would you say it's the language of Beyond itself? I've heard people say it's horrible.
Yeah, Beyond has so many incredibly large, just like grassroots problems with it. So I'm not even gonna like get way into that because I would just get really excited about it and distracted and go off on a tangent. Honestly, I wish I could say, like creating new thing, like working on solving new problems is the hardest part, because that's what to me is the most fun part, and it's more fun when it's challenging. But I feel like, especially recently, there's something to be said for how a development team is supposed to work together, or not just work together, but operate, and that's on an individual and team scale. So in terms of keeping a coherent, like game design vision, and making sure that, and maintaining balance as well in that vision, and making sure that everything we do doesn't disrupt that too much, because that can cause a lot of, it can ruin fun for people if it stays in the game for too long in an unbalanced way.
So what was your path to becoming a programmer full-time for Colonial Marines? As you said, you'd not had much experience with Beyond. You decided to throw in, but with a project the size of Colonial Marines, wouldn't you say that it's been a more arduous or more difficult task than many in your life? Because when I speak with other coders about this sort of thing, being not a coder myself, they said there's everything they've learned or taught themselves, and then there's what they've had to do with Beyond.
Yeah, it's. I mean, when I first applied, I didn't really know what I was doing. I think if you go back and look at my developer application, it's kind of apparent that I kind of sucked at coding, and it's been difficult to learn as I go. And I remember something that really kind of clicked with me was when the first test of the new shuttle code I did. It was an initial test where I had rewritten all the back end, but attached it so that visually there would be zero difference to the players. This was a proof of concept to make sure that the code worked. And the first test we did, we had a bunch of developers on because it was right after a meeting. I was all excited. Bam, didn't work. It failed in the most obvious way possible due to a really simple mistake. And I was like, oh. At the time, I was like, oh, that sucks. Oh well, I'll just make the fix and compile and we'll test it next round. And I saw someone complaining in LOOC, Jesus Christ, fix your code before you push it. And that kind of made me realize when I develop, I'm affecting people's fun. I'm affecting what people do in their free time, what people choose to do in their free time. And I hadn't really thought about that before, and how what I'm doing isn't just a hobby to me. It impacts other people's days and enjoyment.
For good or ill. I mean, you may help them have the greatest game they've ever played, or you may doom them.
Exactly.
To God, this server sucks. I'll never play again.
You're right. That initial conduct of if you have fun your first round, you're way more likely to show up again than if you start up Beyond for the first time, join Colonial Marines, get obliterated, and then never want to play again.
Well, yeah, and especially if it's something that shouldn't obliterate you. Oh yeah, we have a coding error where if you change your clothes, you run out of air.
Exactly.
So
go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask, what do you think are the greatest challenges with Space Station 13 today from the code-based standpoint? At least from the perspective of your experience with Colonial Marines.
So, to date, any Space Station 13 code base is easily the largest project I have ever worked on. In sheer lines of code or whatever metric, it's absolutely massive. That comes with, and it's old. It's so old. There's just layers upon layers of hundreds of different people running code with all sorts of different practices and conventions and ideas of how things should work, and it compounds into a mess. And that's why it's a little easier, I think, on Colonial Marines, because we try to have a coherent development vision, and we try and do things in a common sense way. But still, every day, every week, you run into some new feature that was written 5 years ago that doesn't make any sense, and that's causing problems somewhere dumb. And you just have to sit down and say, okay, why does this person write it this way? How can I change that to suit the server, suit our game mode, and still work?
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, there's such a pile, thousands upon thousands of lines of code written by people you'll never talk to. Sometimes, and I don't mean to diss developers or anything, especially in the Colonial Marines, because I had no idea what I was doing. My first update was a game-breaking glitch where I created the bug. I wasn't fixing anything. I caused a huge problem because I didn't know what I was doing. A lot of people get started in Dreammaker, in Beyond, and so you get a lot of old code that is written by people who are new to programming and don't quite have the conventions and the general style of how things should work hammered down.
Yeah. And I also understand that a lot of Beyond code or what have you, I mean, especially when you realize you're building a game that was built on a game that was built on a game that was built on a game. And so in sifting through the ruins, there may be something in that code that destroys what you're building now.
Exactly. Just last month, I found a security vulnerability that had been there for 7 years because someone didn't sanitize some input somewhere, and it was using an IRC callback that we never used. It's a really abstract and hidden, but it's a classic error that just happened because someone was like, oh yeah, let's give people arbitrary access to a command line. So I fixed it, obviously. Don't go looking for it. I promise it doesn't exist anymore. But it's just crazy to think that that stuff exists, and I'm sure there are more issues like that somewhere else.
Well, right. I mean, you are essentially building a new city on top of the ruins of 2,000 years of history. There's going to be some skeletons.
Exactly.
So, what do you think makes staff good in any of these communities? What traits would you say put them head and shoulders above the rest?
So one thing I think is very important for a good staff member of any mentor, moderator, admin, developer is the ability to have a dialogue with the player base. So that can be like a little more on the development side. Someone says, I think this thing is really like imbalanced. Here's a suggestion on how to fix it. As a developer, it's always good to get those suggestions, be able to recognize them and do something with them. But at the same time, it's really easy to have non-constructive criticism. And a dialogue with the player base is important to establishing like consistent constructive criticism. More on a like moderator or admin side, it's important to not always enforce rules to the letter and a little more in the spirit, because you'll get a lot of people who are just trying to stir stuff up and be annoying people.
Yeah.
And if you have someone who only works off of the letter of the rule, a lot of times that'll go through. Back when I played on New Eden, there was this one guy who would like escalate situations so badly and just go around murdering people, but it was technically allowed because like you'd like in character verbally insult him, and so he'd like punch you. So like, oh yeah, let me like shove him, and then he'd like take out a knife and slit your throat.
So and, yeah, he followed all the correct rules.
Exactly. And so everyone hated him, and he'd walk around like just murdering left and right.
Right.
But he was technically okay, and every round you'd have someone admin help like, hey, this guy just killed me for no reason, and admin like, well, no, technically you punched him, and so it was an escalation of force. No, that's not how that should behave. If that's happening consistently, you need to change the rules or moderate in a different way, and that's a hugely important factor.
So somebody who can admin or be ahead or make decisions, should we say, regardless of their decision-making impact, they should be able to govern, I guess, by their heart and the seat of the pants rather than the exact writ of the rules.
Right, and that's not to say, like, just ignore the rules and do what you think is right as a moderator, but you should think about what you're enforcing while you're enforcing it.
I understand.
Especially, and if you, like, I'm getting a little into this, but if you like disagree with the rule, that doesn't mean it's okay to enforce a rule in a different way. I want to put that as a little disclaimer. But yeah, it's a personal leeway thing, but also individual from server to server.
Since we usually ask the inverse of things as a rhetorical device, I'm going to ask, what do you think makes a bad staff member bad? Space Station 13 certainly has its share of drama and chaos on this principle alone.
Absolutely, yeah. There's always people throwing around like massive accusations, like, "Oh, this staff member is on a power trip and they're just abusing their powers for whatever reason." And there are people who actually do that, and on the other side, there are people who don't do that and just get accused of it. But I think the first sign of a bad moderator or admin is someone who abuses their powers, someone who will like create an event, or we've had people in the past just like rejuvenate themselves because they died and they didn't want to be dead. That's very obviously just like not okay to do. Don't do that. That's an abuse of power, because as an admin or a moderator, you're not supposed to be, as I see it, you're not supposed to be like you're not a more powerful player. You're just a player who is enforcing like meta rules about the game. You're from an RP standpoint and from an RP standpoint and an in-character standpoint, you are no better than any other player on the server, and that's a really important thing to keep in mind.
What do you think Well, first of all, I have to ask, do you play Space Station 13 on any server other than Colonial Marines, or just Colonial Marines?
I honestly I don't play that much. That's why I do a lot of the back end stuff, and I leave the balancing to people who play the game and are more involved in aware of the meta. But I don't play on other servers, and I'll occasionally play on Colonial Marines.
What do you play in Colonial Marines, and why?
I tend to go as a standard Marine, but if it's like a little later in the round, then I'll just join as a Xeno, because I like to get both sides in, and at the same time I'm a little conscious about, I'm probably overly conscious when I play about like not ruining other people's fun. So I like to go in and play a little arcadey and shoot up some Xenos and like fool around and then switch sides and do the same thing as a Xeno.
So, in your history of playing the game, what would you say is the best traitor or antagonist you've ever seen? What is the best player that has added that little bit of spice to the insanity of a round?
Ooh, that's a good question. Probably from my New Eden days, because you see more antags like that in like a classic Space Station 13 setting.
Mm-hmm.
There was a player there was this one guy who always walked around. He didn't have any legs, so he's in a wheelchair, and you see that a lot. And I don't remember what his character name was, but he was just it was the same guy in the same wheelchair in the same role every round. But that's what made it dangerous, because then when he was an antag, you would absolutely not expect him until it was way too late, and you would just end up in a maintenance tunnel somewhere getting like pummeled to death by a guy in a wheelchair and just wondering how it all went wrong. That was always just the weirdest experience.
Yeah, I'd imagine. So what is the most favorite round you have memory of in all of your experience in playing Space Station 13?
I enjoyed playing AI a lot. Again on New Eden, and I think it would probably be a round where I was a malfunctioning AI, Malf AI, and except we voted on like the game mode in the lobby before, so everyone knew I was. It wasn't a random thing. Everyone voted for Malf AI, and I got it. So I had to. I mean, everyone knew, and they were like gearing themselves up to not be killed, and so I had to pretend to be. It was a weird roleplay experience, because you had to be a Malf AI, knowing that they know that you are already evil without any in-game evidence. So it sucked a little, because I got killed, obviously, because people were just arming themselves, and then when I made my play, they obliterated me. But it was a lot of fun, like working with like the levels of meta knowledge and trying not to power game and trying to counter their power gaming, and like a weird back and forth, like in rock paper scissors, where you think, oh, they're gonna throw rock, so I'll throw paper, but they know that I'm gonna throw paper, so they'll throw scissors, so I'll throw rock in the first place, and it just at a certain point it's meaningless.
It's that meme where they say they're playing 13th dimensional chess or something. Where
Exactly.
You both know who the traitor is, but none of you can act on that information. But all of you are going to pretend like you might possibly know it in character, but obviously you can't.
Right. It was so weird. It was fun though.
So, what would you say is the best sort of player for Colonial Marines and the worst?
Well, it's kind of an interesting question, because there's a bunch of different types of players. There are people like me who are there a little bit more for their own entertainment, and that's kind of a neutral point. And then there are people who are there to engage in like in-depth, like crazy fun roleplay, and that's I mean, that contributes to the atmosphere of a round a ton. Having a commander or a squad leader or whoever or queen who is very engaging and looking at it a little bit past just the standard kill the Xenos, kill the humans, like objective, and thinking a little bit more with their position of power in game, using that to make other players have more fun.
I understand.
And then in terms of the like a bad player,
Yeah.
someone who doesn't listen, because there's still a command hierarchy.
Oh yes, I'm well aware of the headaches of being anywhere in your command hierarchy with people who just think that they're Rambo.
Exactly, and because if you don't want to like really engage like between characters, that's fine with me. I don't have a problem with that. But there's still an element of like order that you have to preserve, even if you don't want to get. You got to go like kind of with your squad. You got to do what your higher ups say, and to just ignore that is, I think, occasionally like not really noticed or maybe even sometimes enforced in character, even because it's not. It's one of those things that's like you don't want to like make a whole investigation to someone not participating in the squad experience, because that's a weird thing to investigate and like try to give someone a note for.
Yeah.
And that's something that almost needs to be handled in game within a squad or a command structure or whatever.
Well, yeah, because you have dereliction of duty. You can have the MPs charge them if they run off on their own or what have you, and you can role play that out, and that can be the reinforcement of it. Which
exactly,
yeah,
because that's just not something that's easy to deal with from like an out of character standpoint. And that's why there's like marine law, because that's its own interaction separate from like server rules.
So, what is your favorite event and why?
I like the human versus human events. Those are particularly fun because then some of the weird interactions between like balance, because if you have like a different composition of like the Xeno side, you can get a totally different looking round. But in the human versus human type of events, it's very much more like an even playing field, and it relies a little bit more on individual players like crazy skill and just going nuts and like storming a room and killing 5 people or whatever, just doing whatever wild nonsense. And on top of that, I really liked Whiskey Outpost. That was a ton of fun. The defending from the horde game mode was fun for me.
Yeah, that is a good one. So what is your least favorite event and why?
There was that time that this one's a little recent. There was a time that there was that farting dog that ate people. I wasn't too hot about that one. That has its own like.
I've seen pictures of that. I don't know how I'd have been able to react to that.
I want to say like, I think there's still a little testiness about it, and I don't want to like call anyone out about that. Just from my personal standpoint as a player, that was a little iffy for me.
I understand. So what is your favorite role, least favorite role, and why on Colonial Marines?
I enjoy. I like being an engineer of some type, so that can be like maintenance tech or squad engineer, whatever. I've always kind of enjoyed the construction system, and thinking about like static defenses, or back when we had the supermatter, that was always fun to screw around with and do things a little wild and zany, and try not to kill everyone on the station.
Well, yeah.
By letting it go critical.
Well, accidents happen.
Yeah. Least fun,
yeah,
I'd say is honestly probably any command related position. I don't feel like I'm particularly good at keeping, like I play like a first person shooter called Squad.
Yeah.
And, like you can be and that I like do an okay job as a squad leader, because I think I have a really good understanding of how not to like get everyone killed and maintain cohesion. But it's like a different atmosphere because there's not an RP element of it as much. And when the RP element is introduced to the command role, I think I really falter as a player, so I don't particularly enjoy that.
Why would you think that on many servers, including Colonial Marines, when people voice a desperate prayer, it is never answered?
That's a good question. We get that every once in a while. Part of it is there's a balance, right, between maintaining semi-realistic roleplay versus doing what's funny. And so a lot of times, if someone's in like for Sulaco evac, you have like the one guy in the giant rows of like racks and tables on the one ship holding back the swarm, and he makes some prayer. You don't want to give him like God mode or like a minigun and just mow down people, because that's not fun for the other players.
Yeah, you're taking away from someone else's fun.
Exactly, and so while it would be awesome for him to go Rambo and just kill everyone, that's not the most conducive to fun on a larger scale, and it's not that realistic. And so to make players just almost expect to be saved by a prayer is probably not a good path to go down. And so if you have it as like a rare thing and do it in slightly less high risk and high intensity situations, I think it works a little bit better.
All right. What do you think is the very best map you guys have?
I'm a fan of the old school LV. That one's, I mean, it has its issues for sure. That one's very fun. There's also there is a new one coming out, and that one, it looks great. I want to build a little hype about that, because that is
it Okan's work?
It is. Oh man, I don't want to like credit the wrong people. I believe it's primarily RavingManiac. I apologize so much if I'm wrong about that.
Just talk about the map. I'm sure people will, well, like many players, they'll be like, "Who gives a shit?" But the map itself, what's coming up and what makes it interesting?
So it's one of the. Every time we have a brand new map, it has a different meta from the other ones, because it's created, and the idea for it is first created in a different stage of the meta. And so every time there's a new map, you have a slightly new way of looking at game flow. And so one thing that we've been trying to focus on, especially with this map, is issues with like meta rushing, because that's a problem. That's a significant problem we have.
Oh yeah.
It's been a problem for a while, and so we have like the fog to stop people from walking out. But that's kind of like a kludge. It's a widespread non like RP effort to reduce that, and it works, but it can be done in better ways with game flow. And I think one thing this map does is it was made with that in mind. So ideally, I mean, we haven't, of course, done a test with 150 players, but I think this one's going to be a little bit better about that.
I look forward to it.
So do I.
If you could say one thing to people who've just discovered your station for the first time, if you could communicate one thing to them and have them hold in their heart as they move forward and experience their first round, what would it be?
Keep an open mind. This is a video game of 200 people interacting in new ways every round, and so a bad round, or a particularly good round even, for you can be a one-off. And so keep an open mind with, and think about what you might want to do as you get a better understanding of the game. If you want to continue being a standard, if you want to take one of the civilian roles, or be a Xeno main, or whatever that is, I think it's always good to imagine the possibilities.
So, I was going to ask, with the nature of drama in Space Station 13, every server has their own fair share and shake. Do you think that that is just part of the inevitable makeup and problem of a community that has so many people who may disagree on factually nearly everything? Or do you think it's because of certain elements that we're not aware of?
I think to a certain extent it is almost unavoidable when you have such a low barrier to widespread communication. So i.e. the Reddit. It's really easy to just make an account, make a post, and a lot of people will see it, or some people will see it, depending on how many upvotes it gets. But it's easy for the polarized sides to make their opinions known and to try and just broadcast their opinion as loudly as possible. And so that causes drama. That's how you get conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theories about whatever major events in U.S. history wouldn't exist without the internet, because you wouldn't have if someone had doubt, they wouldn't be communicating with people who were absolutely sure of whatever. It just would not be the case. And so, in a lot of ways, things like the subreddit are mediums for that, for drama. But at the same time, they're still absolutely tools of good. And the world without the internet would not be the same place. It would be a very different place for the worse, in my opinion. And the same goes for the subreddit. The subreddit is a good place for players of different servers and different everything really to interact in a way. It's I love there's a piece of concept art up there, or just art in general up there right now on the third or fourth spot that looks great. So shout out to whoever did that. And it's a good unifying factor.
So, yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying, is that the internet makes the good and the bad more easily accessible and debatable.
Right. And at the same time, every once in a while, there are people who explicitly just live for drama. But that's a fact of life anywhere, really. There's people who like conflict,
yes.
Almost.
Oh, yes, they thrive on it.
Yeah, and so to say, oh yeah, we can move past drama and we can rise above that. I think it's a little unrealistically optimistic. It happens, but one important part about playing an online MMORPG, I mean, it's not that massively multiplayer, but it's a multiplayer online RPG, is that you have people like that. And an important factor about being part of that player base is just learning how to deal with that.
Indeed. So, speaking of drama and chaos, over the years there have been many attempts to remake Space Station 13. Do you think that these are all doomed to failure, or has someone not hit that magic place yet?
That is something I have thought about so many times. I'd always liked to see Space Station 13 on a new platform. If not just because the Beyond engine sucks, but because it would be a better way to reach more people and move from kind of the niche that it is into a little bit of a wider platform. But in terms of possibility, I think last I heard there was someone. There's someone who has a decent attempt going, but it's just one guy working on it. He's got a Patreon. I'm not plugging it because I don't know.
Was it
him
the
or if
3D
it's working.
one?
Yeah, the 3D one.
They disappeared, apparently.
Well, damn.
That's what I'm talking about, the curse. I mean, there's...
I didn't know that one had disappeared. Yeah, I mean, it's possible. It would just take a unified, coherent, long-term effort. And that's not something that you see in the Space Station 13 community. You don't see a team of 10 people being like, oh yeah, I'm just going to not push any updates for 2 years, work entirely from the ground up on a new engine, on a project that may not work when I have real life things to work on, or I could just just code for a server and have like and know that my work will be appreciated no matter how the deployment works or what the climate is like in 2 years. And to take the time and money and effort to sit down and make a new game just takes an incredible amount of time, and for that reason I think it's not super likely.
I saw a post some years ago about Space Station 13. And I'm not a coder, I'm not a programmer, I'm not very computer savvy. I have people in the Legion help me with mods because I break everything I touch. But I have heard that if you wanted to replicate a substantive quality Space Station 13 server and replicate that in a better engine, it would take several hundred people many years of solid work just to get it to the level of content it has now.
I don't think that's the case. I think to put a very, very abstract timeline on it, if you gave a 20-person studio 2 to 3 years, I think it could be done. You don't need an incredibly massive team. If there was money behind that project and you had 20 people working like normal work hours, I think you could get it done.
Interesting.
To say that it would take hundreds of people like 10 years to do is a little wild to me. Maybe I'm wrong about how long it takes to make a new game, but there's a lot of content in Space Station 13, but there's not so much that it cannot be replicated.
I understand.
Plus, if you develop it in a good way and you write good code from the start, adding new features, it does not take as much time as it does for a normal Space Station 13 developer today. Because a lot of times they have to write new infrastructure from the ground up just to get one feature to work.
Interesting. So, now that we're nearing the end of the video, or interview, I should say, I have to ask a very critical question. Clown or mime?
Ooh, I'd have to say mime, honestly. I mean, clowns are fun, yeah, but with a mime, I feel like there's so much more opportunity, and like maybe more development needs to be done into mimes. But mimes, you can there's the added challenge of not communicating, and a lot of people do the thing where they do like the /me emote, so they say like my name reaches over and does whatever, and they do that as a way of communicating. I think it can be expanded upon a little bit, and I think it'd be really cool to see. I think mimes have a wider challenge in front of them that they can surmount, and it's so much better when they do.
So the more difficult choice, just because it requires a harder hand, as it were.
Right, and when they do succeed, it's that much more successful and crazy to see.
As we've reached the end of the interview, do you have anything you want to communicate to the Space Station 13 community? Shoutouts, apocalyptic warnings, requests, or so on. The time is, of course, yours.
I want to talk a little bit about the future of Colonial Marines, because there's a lot of drama happening right now.
Absolutely.
And so, let's well, for those who don't know, recently we had one of our spriters, our artists, the head developer and the host retire in about a 24-hour time, in like a 6-hour time frame. A lot of people are saying, "Oh, it's the end of days. CM is going to implode and never exist again." That's not true. That's just expressly false. As long as there are people who want to play Colonial Marines will exist. Because if you think about it, moderators and admins are just people who played and were passionate about the game and wanted to help out. It's not like we pay them. It's not like we hired them off of Craigslist or something. They were players who were passionate.
Right.
And so to say that Colonial Marines is going to disappear is patently false. Past that, people like to call up the closed source nature of Colonial Marines.
Yeah.
And one solution I've seen people talking about is making it open source as an effort to keep it a little more lively. I honestly don't think that is the case. I know it's kind of a controversial topic, closed source versus open source, especially in PlayStation 13, where people throw around licensing things all the time and
Of
copyright issues. But I think CM actually benefits a lot from a closed source model, because it's a little easier to keep a really like coherent development vision, than if you have one person okaying merge requests or denying them, and you don't have like a development meeting. Having a development team that can sit down and say, this is what we're adding, here's how like we're going to try and make it work. It's a lot easier to maintain balance and artistic consistency in like the tone and the theme, because Joshua's done an incredible job of like keeping things coherent. He's the one developer that's been here longer than I have, and he's just consistently done, I think, a really great job of that. So Colonial Marines will live on. Closed source is, in this context, better.
Do you think it's just necessary to maintaining that sense of strategic vision and quality, or do you think closed source is, I don't know, essential to keeping its uniqueness, its place in the community?
I think it's absolutely about the coherent game design vision. Back when we released some major update, and APOP, and this is back before APOP left, I believe before Fuel left as well. He basically at the next meeting he sat down and he said, "We have reached and surmounted everything I ever planned for Colonial Marines. It is up to you as a development team now to decide where you want to take that vision, and to continue to develop it." And that to me speaks a lot to just the benefit of closed source for Colonial Marines, because we sat down and said, okay, here's what we want to do as a team. Here's what we want to work on and develop. I don't think you'd get that with the closed source server.
So
sorry, with an open source server,
no. I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying. Because if you ask a lot of people in Space Station 13, they often will say, oh, it's closed source because they're dicks, or, oh, that's open source, it sucks, and people just make these dismissive gestures.
Right.
I was speaking with someone who said that the reason they went closed source on their project in development is because they were having all of their shit stolen on a continual basis, so nothing they were building for themselves was actually their own anymore. It was just appropriated by another server instantly. And that, of course, resulted in some animosity. But I've also spoken with people who say that no, open source is the way to maintain good relations with people. And I know people who see this as a preference or flavor to a server, perhaps. But would you say that one is inherently better, or is that something that a server has to decide for themselves?
I think it's contextual from server to server. I don't think the entire Space Station 13 community would benefit from all being closed source or all being open source. Because I get the whole people are just stealing our features and taking our players type of thing. And I think if there were like 3 other Colonial Marine servers, you wouldn't see any one at the top of the charts as frequently. Although CM specifically benefits from a higher player count. And there's an increasing returns to scale there at a certain point. But when it really is server to server, I'd say. Sometimes you need things to be coherent and together for a very specific reason. Sometimes it's better for community relations to have open source so that players feel like they have a voice. One problem we have at Colonial Marines is like pipeline problems in terms of having players and staff feel like they have a voice in development. Because while we're working with our vision, that doesn't mean we just develop what we want to.
Right.
Because we wouldn't exist without the player base, obviously. And so one thing we're going to be working on actually moving forward, with our new head dev, Spooky Donut, is to work on like communication with the player base. We just recently, sometime right after he was announced as the next head dev, we have a summer 2018 roadmap in which we list a few things we're working on. Some of my stuff is on there. The new map is listed on there, and that's important to tell the player base, hey, we're not just like doing nothing, because we have pipeline problems with bugs and we have issues polishing old content. Like tanks have problems that I need to hop on.
Yeah, I unfortunately found out the difficulties of walking around tanks, especially when you take a bunch of hyperzine and accidentally run under their tracks.
Yeah, and like, to name a specific about tanks, right now I just have people get slept when they get driven over. That's a little bit of a throwaway fix, and one thing that would benefit from, well, one way that we could benefit from like better communication is trying to find a better way to incapacitate players while they're beneath the tank, because you don't want them standing up. But that's partly a coding issue, but it's also partly just a balance problem.
I understand.
And so communication is key if you're going to go closed source.
Well, thank you for the interview, sir. It's been very interesting and enlightening.
Yeah, I've enjoyed a lot. Thank you for having me.
Sure, no problem.